This week at Sharia Talmud, we discussed Kiddushin Daf Gimel Amud Beis. Where we left off in the last year, we had a proof that a father has the right to marry off his daughter, and he will receive the money for that marriage. We wanted to learn from the pasuk, "V'yotzei chinam ein kesef." Ein kesef la'adon zeh, aval yesh kesef la'adon acher. U'may ninhu, who is that? That's the father. In other words, when a slave girl goes out of the rishus, out of the domain of their owner, there's no money given. But when a daughter goes out of the domain of her father for marriage, money will be given. That's what the Gemara said. Came along the Gemara and brought a deflection of that. I'll say that it goes to her. Instead of making the inference that it goes to the father, I'll say the inference is that there's no money to the slave owner, the master, but there is money to the girl in the case of marriage. The Gemara continues and says it doesn't like this idea. Does it make any sense that the father has the zchuyot, the merit to marry off his daughter, and she receives the money? And the Gemara brings the verse from where we know that the father has the rights. The pasuk says, "Biti netanti leisha zeh," my daughter that I gave to this man. So you see that the father has the rights. So the svara is that it doesn't make any sense that if the father has the rights, that the daughter should receive the money. The Gemara pushes it off by saying, no, that verse is talking about when she's a katana. That's when the father has the rights. So your difficulty against me is not a difficulty. The Gemara continues and brings an alternative pasuk as to where do we know that the father has the rights when the girl is a na'ara, over 12 years old, in between 12 and 12 and a half. The answer will be from a different verse. It says, "Na'ara beis avia," a young girl in the house of her father. That proves, kol shevak na'arim la'avia. Every profit that the girl gets goes to the father. Comes along Tosfos, and he has a problem with this. How is it possible that the Gemara said that the verse, "Biti netanti leisha zeh," my daughter that I gave to this man, is referring to a katana, when it says clearly that the punishment will be stoning? For example, that's talking about motzi shemra, and we're talking about a case where this engaged girl cheated on her husband, and the punishment will be stoning. If she's really a young girl under 12 years old, there will be no punishment, no stoning for such a case. Not only that, Tosfos says, but the verses continue, and they say that the man also gets punishment. He has to pay a fine. If the girl is referring to a katana, he shouldn't have to pay the fine. So how is it possible that the Gemara says that we're talking about a katana? Tosfos answers, no problem. He says, really, when it's that verse, when it says, I gave the daughter that I gave to this man, she was a katana. She really was a young girl at that point. He married her off when she was young. When is the punishment happening? At a later date. During the year, she turned 12 years old, and now she's a gedola. So the punishments are applicable. But now, Tosfos really has a difficulty. Because if the verse is referring to a katana, well, then it's Peshita. We don't need a verse to tell us that the father has rights to marry off his daughter and receive the money. We know that already, because we know that the father has rights to sell his daughter as a slave. And the Gemara Kasuba says, if we know that the father has rights to sell his daughter off as a slave, and therefore we also know that he has the rights to her handiwork, to all the work that she does. So if that's true, therefore if we know that he has the rights to sell her off as a slave, we should also know that he has the rights to marry her off. It's Peshita. So Tosfos comes along and he says that Maaseh Yadeya, her work, and marrying her are not the same thing. It makes sense that when you sell her as a slave girl, that you should know that you get her Maaseh Yadeya. Why? Because that's really what you sold. If you can sell her as a slave girl, if you can sell the Maaseh Yadeya, well, surely you can receive the Maaseh Yadeya, which is not true by marriage. It's not shaykh, Tosfos says. It's not applicable to use the concept of sale by marriage. You're not selling the girl for marriage. You're marrying the girl off. But you can't learn from the fact that you can sell her that you also have the rights to marry her. But now apparently we have a contradiction. Wait, by the slave girl, when she comes of age, the slave owner can marry her off to his son or to himself. With which money are you referring to? With the money that he paid for a slave. So if the Kiddushin is not included in that original deal, then how can he marry off without not having to give her more money? And the father had no rights to give her over in marriage because we didn't have any source for such a thing. It appears that Tosfos is giving the same answer as the Ramban, which we'll discuss in a minute, which is, the father doesn't really marry her off. It's the Torah that marries her off. She was handed over to this guy to be a slave girl. When she turns 12 years old, the slave owner has the rights to marry her off, but those rights did not come from the father. The Torah gave him the rights for such a thing. The Ramban has a similar kasha to Tosfos, which is Peshita. How can you say that the verse is talking about a katana we should be able to learn that from the fact that he can sell her as a slave girl. He gives a different answer, though. He says the reason we cannot learn marriage from the fact that the father can sell her as a slave is because the father never had any right to marry her. The proof is, you see, at 12 years old, she goes out of the father's reshus. When it comes to selling her Maaseh Yedea, so the father gave over exactly what he had. In other words, he had the Maaseh Yedea. He had all of her work until she was 12 years old. He sold that to a slave owner. And then at 12 years old, she also goes out from the reshus of the slave owner. But marriage lasts forever. The father had no rights to give over the marriage to somebody else because the girl goes out of his reshus when she is 12 years old. So how can the father give over to somebody else something that's going to last forever, like marriage? The Ramban then asked the same kasha as Tosfos. Well, how does Yehud work? Wait a second, at 12 years old, you don't have to do a separate Maaseh in order to marry her. It was included in the original. The answer is Einochanami was included in the original. But it's the Torah that gave over the rights. It's not the father that's giving over the girl. It's the Torah that's giving over the girl to marriage to the slave owner. The Torah gave the rights to that slave owner to marry her.